The editing is going to be a nightmare from now on, because it's going to be like, where was the cat from the previous shot?
It's just jumping all over the screen because you're cutting.
So hi, and welcome to my mental breakdown. I'm doing something called the Mad Tea Party, which is going to be a series of videos. I'm here today with Olivia Healy-Mirkovich, and we're going to be talking about depression, because that's what this blog is, if you haven't figured that out yet. I have created a questionnaire, and we're basically just going to have a conversation based on the questions. It's to sort of show that I am not by any means the only person who's dealing with this. A lot of people who are dealing with this, but also a lot of people are experiencing different things in dealing with this. So I wanted to sort of explore that a little bit. And I'm gonna have a cat on my lap while I'm doing it. It's very comforting.
Well, the internet hates cats to me, disaster.
Editing.
Just stop watching.
The first question that I have on here is, when did you first realize that you were suffering from depression?
Probably had symptoms of depression when I was 13 or so, starting high school.
Okay.
And that presented as sadness, as pretty quickly self-harm, as restricting food. That went on until mid-college, and I was in deep, deep denial of that being actually an issue until I was not literally dragged, but almost literally dragged into a counselor's office where they told me pretty quickly, hey, sweetie, this is a whole thing. This is called major depression. You also have anorexia. And I didn't like hearing those things, so I left and didn't go back for another year when I found someone who wasn't quite as aggressive with their proposed treatment plan.
Someone who you can jive with, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know why I come up with these sayings that sound like someone from the 1950s. There we go. So we kind of went over this, but the next question is, what did you do when you realized it?
I went to the first counselor. He pretty much said, oh, we have to get you in an ED clinic right away, which is like an overnight thing.
Yeah.
Then he also said we might have to 5150 you. That's where they keep you overnight for, I think, up to 72 hours in a psych ward.
Yeah.
Which felt like an extreme thing to hear on a first meeting. So I, before he got my contact info, booked it out of the building. And then I found a different counselor later. And I'd like to take this moment to apologize to Dr. Izette because I was the worst client in the world. I was so reluctant and so snarky and so dismissive of all of her methods. And I was probably really challenging to deal with. And also I still didn't really want to be in therapy because it felt unnecessary because I had done such a good job of repressing all of the things.
You're fine. You've made it this far.
I'm already here. Everyone feels this way, right? People just, they just don't eat for 4 days, eat one big meal like a snake, and then they stop eating again for another 4 days, and that's fine.
Normal.
And just crying all the time and hurting yourself with razor blades or any little sharp thing around the house. Turns out that's not standard procedure for being a human.
Have you ever taken any medication?
I have not.
Okay.
Well, a little bit. So I was in my first round of therapy prescribed Celexa, and I didn't take it because I was afraid of it, because I was, I think, just misinformed. I thought it would change me, which it wouldn't really do. It would just kind of change how my brain was doing things.
Yeah.
Also, my depression was part of my identity, and I didn't know what I would be or who it would be if I didn't have those symptoms. Yeah,
that's totally true.
I was briefly prescribed when I went through grad school, kind of in the past couple of years. I don't think I developed it, but symptoms of panic disorder started showing up because it runs in my family. So it was just a matter of time before panic attacks started happening. So I briefly had Xanax just to, like, when I was having a panic attack, help calm those down, which was great, and it worked really well. And it was wild to experience being awake without like vibrating from anxiety the entire time. But my current insurance doesn't like to give Xanax out to people because so many folks use it recreationally, so they offered me Benadryl, which doesn't do the same thing.
No. So thanks for everyone who's ruined that for the rest of us. And we kind of talked about this one too, but have you had any sort of counseling? So you were talking about that, and apparently you kind of got pulled into counseling the first time and didn't really work, and then you were able to find someone you were able to work with. Yeah. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and I was with that therapist for like 4 years, and it was very helpful. Grad school made all these panic things start to pop up, and I eventually went, maybe I should see a counselor again. Had like the parade of the shittiest counselors I've ever had. So I had one person tell me my queerness and my sexual assault history are correlated, which is a really upsetting thing to hear for lots of reasons, so I stopped seeing them immediately. And then I had another person tell me that my depression is caused by Donald Trump, which isn't entirely untrue, but but my depression predates
Donald by quite a bit.
By a lot. And then separately, I had an ER doctor tell me that my depression was caused by me taking my allergy medication, which was prescribed to me for my depression, which is great. Very recently, I found a counselor who's very good at her job and calls me on my shit in a way that she needs to. It took a minute to find someone who worked well with me.
It's another thing I think that's worth mentioning, because you've kind of already brought it up, is that if you're talking with someone and you're like, this isn't working for me, then you don't have to keep talking with them. You can find somebody else who you think is better suited to what you need.
Yeah, it's a little bit like online dating. There's lots of styles of therapy. There's lots of just personality types. Kitten is so cute, so distracting. I keep looking at it.
Do you have any sort of community or support around depression specifically?
I have a close-knit group of people that I'm pretty open with about it. You're obviously one of those because we're here talking to the internet about depression.
Right. A couple videos ago, I was talking about school, and the one person who I had as my friend, that was her.
That was me. Which informs a lot of why we both have mental illness. Not completely, but it's a big component.
Yes, it is.
So yeah, not a huge group of people. I probably have 4 or 5 that understand the symptoms.
A couple, like, individuals.
Luckily my significant other is one of those. She really gets it because she also deals with symptoms of mental illness.
Helps a lot.
It helps a whole lot. So that makes it less scary for her when I do get symptomatic, that she knows what's happening and it's not just like a flip has switched and all of a sudden I'm an unreasonable person.
What are some ways that you have learned to cope with depression?
I learned that most of the things I was doing were bad ideas and that I shouldn't do this anymore. Things that I would do initially when I was feeling depressed or anxious or both, which is a fun combo, I would immediately withdraw from everyone. I would withhold food, which is a whole thing. It's control issues and it works to manage symptoms, but it creates a whole second round of things which are bad news.
I think I have a similar thing, but I do it in a totally different way. I think the obsessive compulsive tendencies that I have are me deciding like, oh, this is something that I have a control over.
In the applied animal behavior, I'm an animal trainer, that's like my whole deal. There's a group of things called primary reinforcers for animals, and those are things like food, water, shelter, things that we are hardwired wanting and trying to get. Recently we have realized that control over the environment is a primary reinforcer. So we're hardwired to want to control our environment anyway. So when you have mental illness, it makes that so much worse because we feel like we can't even control our emotions, or if we have a trauma history, I don't have control over my own body, and then controlling external things is really helpful. I also would cut myself, which was fun. Control over the body works really well, but obviously problematic because you're hurting your body on purpose. So now my coping strategies are I reach out to people right away, which is sometimes really hard. It's the last thing that I want to do when I'm feeling symptomatic is talk to people about it, but that's now the first thing that I do, which helps a lot. Even just a text like, hey, I'm feeling sad today, and then it's on people's radar so we can work on things from there.
Right.
Getting out of the house and walking. Art used to be a coping mechanism. Grad school kind of gummed up the works there because my art in grad school was about a history of trauma, which was a very bad idea, and I don't recommend doing art about trauma without also having external support from a professional, and that made things worse. So I'm trying to get back into doing art as a way to cope and deal with things a little better. And honestly, distraction can be a thing. You know, we were talking earlier about watching somehow 4 hours of Vine compilations in one day, even though they're only 6 seconds each, so you have to consume so many of them.
So last question, what was your lowest point or just a low point you're comfortable discussing? And what steps did you take to crawl out of it? If there's something specific comes to mind.
So depending on how dark you want to get on this thing, we can go
I will go as dark as you are comfortable.
All right. So I've attempted suicide twice. The first time I tried to go jump off a bridge on campus. I went to UC Santa Cruz. They have a lot of bridges, but they have one that kind of goes over a gully, and people have jumped off of it before, which is a real bummer because there's a beautiful hiking trail right below it, which means that some poor hiker was having just a good old time in the redwoods and then found a body. But I was interrupted because I had left a party to go do that thing, because that's a fun way to do that. Just like, bye, I'm going away forever now.
Wow.
I almost was 51-50'd, but my therapist at the time thought that...
What were you interrupted by?
by people walking up and finding me. Yeah,
okay.
by humans interfering.
Yeah.
But yeah, the therapist thought that being hospitalized was possibly more dangerous for me at that time because I was a runner than being out in the world. So she had me contract with her and people around me to keep me supervised. So I was on suicide watch for a little while. Second time, I tried to overdose on Vicodin, which just led to me vomiting excessively and winding up in the hospital because I had taken probably a lethal dose. My body was like, nope, we're gonna spit that back out. The fun part now is that any pain medicine that is the same family makes me immediately sick.
Yeah.
So I did that to me. That was my bad. That was probably the lowest.
Yeah.
And at that point, I was feeling pretty helpless, pretty hopeless. I hadn't been in therapy for very long, so I wasn't seeing the effects of that. I was in therapy, but when I was there, talking about any history stuff would immediately make me dissociate, which is when your brain goes to Mars briefly. I was catatonic. I couldn't hear her, couldn't really see her, and I don't remember many of those sessions.
So what ended up happening to make you get to a point where you're like a functioning human being?
So much therapy.
So therapy, yeah.
Just keep on going. I don't know how my therapist got me to start talking, but there was a whole year where I was going every week and sitting in the chair and dissociating immediatally.
I remember you telling me that you would go and just like nothing would happen.
Nothing would happen. It was really, I'm sure, frustrating for her because she was just staring at a blank wall of a person whose brain was clearly not there.
Yeah.
But little by little, she managed to get me to start talking.
Uh-huh.
And then we got to do some actual work and process things, and we mostly did like cognitive behavioral therapy. So that style of therapy is like really looking at neurology. So if you have a negative thought pattern in your brain, whether it's like I'm worthless, I don't deserve love, like I'm an awful person, whatever the shitty part of your brain is saying about you, you've rehearsed that thought a lot, so that neurological pathway in your brain is pretty beefy. It's pretty strong. It's been happening a lot. So CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is all about changing that and practicing different routes so that when you're feeling down, your first thought isn't, oh, I suck. It's, the situation is difficult. I'm not a bad person. I'm just having a hard time with this, or whatever you're replacing it with. So it's a lot of just practicing that. And at first, it's really difficult and it feels really awkward. It feels like stilted because you have to kind of sit there and go, I am not a bad person. I am feeling this way because of these things in my environment, and it's like reading a script to yourself over and over again.
I think that would be really hard to do.
Yeah.
For a lot of people, it's like hardwired. The bad.
The
bad script.
Until it becomes habit, the new script.
It's over.
It's even weirder when you're doing like any interpersonal stuff, like trying to rework how a relationship is going with another person and having to rehearse in front of them. It's one thing to say to me, like, I am these things and going through the speech, but then with another person, it's that whole, like use I feeling and not you judging statements.
Right,
It feels really uncomfortable and unnatural and awkward, but eventually it becomes habit and it works a lot better.
Because humans are just programmed wrong in the first place.
Yeah, it turns out. On the internet too, there's this whole like call out culture that I see a lot of where it's just without.
I say as we make our internet video.
Yeah, this is gonna be fun getting feedback for this. But yeah, I see like things that are taken out of context and people jump down each other's throats right off the bat, and that's not helpful.
Is there any place where you want people like to follow you on social media or anything?
So I'm not an expert at all. If you have any concerns about, especially suicide prevention, there's the suicide prevention hotline. There's also, they have a text message hotline and in like online chat option. Those work really well. When I'm feeling especially depressed, the last thing I want to do is call a stranger because I don't like talking on the phone with anybody. So being able to like text someone like, hey, I'm real sad, please help me, is easier. For those of you who don't remember, the 1990s zines are usually little self-published things. There's like a whole history. They were very involved in the like the punk scene in the 60s and then the riot girl scene in the 90s, and they're popular now as kind of a platform for voices that don't get heard very often. So any marginalized group is going to be pretty big in the zine scene. And my girlfriend and I are now making zines under the handle Debbie Downers. So our Instagram handle is Debbie Downers Zines. And we do guides on dealing with depression and anxiety and things like that from the point of view of people who have those things and experience those symptoms. I know I've gotten a lot of really unhelpful feedback from people when we talk about mental illness. It's a lot of, have you tried just smiling more? Or have you tried yoga?
Yeah.
Or have you tried...
I didn't think about this too. It's really not helpful. And if it does work for some people who do have it, then that's great.
Awesome.
But recognize that, like, for other people, it's actually harmful.
Because it feels very dismissive. So we make zines to kind of address that, so that if you're living with symptoms of depression and have a partner who doesn't understand it, you can go here, read this. This kind of talks about how I experience things, because everyone experiences symptoms differently, like you mentioned at the beginning. So you can kind of circle the ones that apply to you and hand it to your partner or friend or family member and go, hey, these are things that apply to my situation, and these are things that would help. A lot of people with the best intentions want to offer input and help. So if I say, I'm really anxious about this meeting, they try to go, oh, well, don't worry about it. It's going to be fine. You don't have anything to worry about. I'm like, that's great. All I want you to say to me is, that sucks. I'm sorry that you feel anxious. Yeah. In the same way that we are not professionals in mental health, chances are neither are any of our friends and family. So yeah. This says, there we go. Keep calm and carry on. Keep calm and carry on.
There you go. There's your takeaway. You've been watching our mental breakdown, and I'm sorry, kitten.
Oh no.
You're gonna hate this. I have to turn it off. Oh my goodness. We are drinking tea, even though we're drinking it out of coffee mugs, because we figured the teacups weren't big enough.
We had a whole discussion about it.
It's really good. It's Earl Grey with jasmine. This is the quality content that you signed up for, right?
Brought to you by Twinnings, our sponsor. And you can just put the little thing here.
Oh, I'm sure they'd love that.
They might sue you.
The face of depression.